Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the second Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1928 and 1929. Director Irving Cummings made history with In Old Arizona, the first major Western to use sound and the first talkie filmed outdoors. The film was a hit and went on to earn 5 Oscar nominations, only winning Best Actor for Warner Baxter. And it was another innovative film, The Broadway Melody, that would win Best Picture in the end. So why did In Old Arizona come up short? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to In Old Arizona. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host Kevin Jacobson, and boy are we at the very early stages of the Oscars now, and we are also somewhat in a new era, which will be a short era, all things considered, considering I'm talking about the second Academy Awards, but this particular ceremony, the winners were decided by executive board, basically, so not the full membership. And there's another added caveat of this particular year, which is that there were no quote-unquote official nominees, which means only the winners were announced, and then the other nominees, quote-unquote, we know from just after the fact of what was in consideration. So this is going to be a very, very unique year that we're talking about here, and I'm so excited to have my guest on the main show again for one last go of it. You first heard him all the way back on my 2012 episode talking Life of Pi, and 1992 talking Howard's End, 1970 talking MASH, and 1952 talking High Noon, plus every single episode of How Did They Win. Please welcome back from Next Best Picture and Gold Derby and his own blog Exact Change Today, Tom O'Brien.
Hi, everybody.
Here we are, Tom. We've made it all the way to the beginning of the Oscars, isn't it? Isn't it wild?
What a wonderful journey it's been, and
Yes.
can't believe we're near the end of it. So I'm very, very honored that you thought of me to bring me back for this penultimate episode.
Of course. Well, technically not penultimate because I'm going to be doing 2019 after this, and then the first ceremony after. So whatever the word is for third to last.
That's
here you
fine.
are. Yes. So today we are talking about a movie called In Old Arizona, which I am assuming was the runner-up to the Broadway Melody. Very hard to tell, especially considering, like I said, this was all based on the votes of judges and the executive board, so can anything really be a runner-up? Did they just decide by unanimous vote? I don't really know. So, let's do a quick summary of In Old Arizona. It is a Western, but not just any Western. It's the first Hollywood Western to use sound and also the first talkie in general to be filmed outdoors. And it is based on the character of the Cisco Kid from the 1907 story The Caballero's Way by O. Henry. So the film tells the story of a bandit named the Cisco Kid who is on the run after robbing a stagecoach. There's a sergeant named Mickey Dunn who is assigned to find him dead or alive with a $5,000 reward. And the Cisco Kid meets up with his lover Tanya, who eventually gets herself involved with the sergeant and then schemes with him to trap the Cisco Kid, basically just for the reward money. So the film was directed by Irving Cummings and written by Tom Barry. It stars Warner Baxter as the Cisco Kid, Edmund Lowe as Sergeant Mickey Dunn, and Dorothy Burgess as Tanya. In Old Arizona earned 5 Oscar nominations, tying with another film, The Patriot, for the most, and it walked away with 1 Oscar, but that one, of course, was not Best Picture. Okay, Tom, so I know that you are a fan of the Western, so that's another reason why I wanted to have you on for this one, especially one that is so formative for the genre in some ways. Not others, but some ways. So, Tom, I don't know if you've seen this one before or if this is your first time, but what do you think of In Old Arizona?
Well, I am a fan of the Westerns, having been raised in the wild and woolly Connecticut suburbs. But
Yes.
uh, this particular one is such an odd duck. It's it is a real landmark in the sense of being shot outdoors and the challenges that I'm sure were brought to it because it is very it utilizes the wide open spaces in a way that no other sound film had done to that time. And the story itself is interesting because it's so told basically from the Cisco Kid's point of view. And usually he has been seen as a rogue, and he's presented here as kind of a gentleman's bandit. He will rob stagecoaches for the Wells Fargo money of other people, but he will not rob the passengers on the stagecoach. Very elegant, very suave, and kind of goofy. And it's a very interesting performance, that Warner Baxter really creates here. Very different than what he will go on to do in 42nd Street. His Cisco Kid is charming, and it's very hard to see him as a bad guy because it's the other people in it are either doofuses or worse. It's it's an interesting film technically. It does, like many films in this lineup, have one foot in the silent film era, particularly in Dorothy Burgess's overexpressive performance, and another in the sound era, because I think Warner Baxter's performance is very subtle and plays to the camera, as goofy as he can be sometimes. I think you're right in that it was probably the runner-up. Uh, and it is in stark contrast to the film that was named Best Picture, which we will get to in a little while.
Yeah, so this is a tough one for me. I certainly respect the history that was made with this film. I'm sure it wasn't easy, considering there was no real precedent for talkies that were filmed outdoors. And yes, the sound is not ideal by any means, but putting all of that into context, I think it's not necessarily bad either. Like, it could have been worse, is what I'm saying. There were a few moments when the dialogue is a bit hard to hear, but I would say it's mostly easy to follow and sort of comprehensible. It's kind of a simple story that's being told here, so I can't imagine that this will be one of the longer review segments we've done on this show. But I'll say, of all the Best Picture nominees from this year, I do think this is the one that is probably the most digestible, especially given the time period. Just for the main character to be the bandit, I think is an interesting perspective and something that is more of a modern take, as you kind of alluded to, something we don't always see from classic Westerns. And I think the audience is really way, way more on his side by the end of the film and really throughout the film. So I appreciate that. But there are a number of elements that really do date the film that prevent it from maybe being a true classic that it could have been, starting with the fact that we have multiple white actors playing Mexicans.
Yes.
With like very thick over the top accents, and the makeup is on to make their skin darker. And according to what I've been reading, the Baxter performance in particular started, or at least contributed to, the stereotype of how Mexicans were portrayed on screen, which is not great, but I do think that he has a charismatic presence to him that makes that character fun to watch. But I also look at the performances that both he and Dorothy Burgess are giving, and I don't see real people you know? I
Yeah.
see just two-dimensional stereotypes for the most part, especially Dorothy Burgess, who I think, to be quite honest, is actively bad here. I don't know how you feel about what she's giving, but it's just not, does not hold up in the slightest.
Yeah, she's genuinely terrible.
Yeah,
Yeah, part of it is that she is still acting in silent films, it seems like, because
right.
there's a number of moments in it when she expresses shock, in which her eyes go wide and her palms are lifted, facing the camera, and
Yep.
it's like, oh, this is like the worst of silent film acting, and especially compared to Baxter, who is, yes, his Cisco Kid is a bit of a stereotype, but he manages to play to the camera more, and
Yeah.
I think is more effective in that sense.
Yeah. I really just struggled with a lot of her scenes, to be honest. Just all of her gestures, just so cartoonish and obnoxious, and truly doing the most to make you absolutely despise this character. There's no humanity in her. She's just in it for the money, and she will just sell anyone out. And sometimes that can be fun to watch, but here she's just playing it so stereotypically and really not really having an understanding of who she really is at her core, that I just mostly end up annoyed with most of her scenes rather than being entertained.
Uh,
And I think part of the problem is just in the writing itself, which does not give her much to work with on that level.
no.
Um, and honestly, almost every woman in the film just does not have much dimension outside of the cook character, Tonita, Tanya's cook, Tonita, which I thought I missed something because I thought for a minute that she was her mother for some reason, but
So did I. Yeah.
oh, well, there you go.
She's not well introduced at all.
Right, no. But she at least seems like a three-dimensional person, and she's very poorly treated by Tanya, but she ends up actually getting a bit of revenge on her in the end, which I would say was pretty well earned. And she's played by Soledad Jimenez, who is sadly uncredited, as are most people in this movie, outside of the 3 stars. But if there were supporting categories at the time, I imagine maybe she could have snuck in there. I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know. This is also one of those, another stereotype, or at least subgenre, uh, uh, area that was created with this, is the singing cowboy. Everybody sings, not just the Cisco Kid, but barbers sing. There's barbershop quartet in it. Soldiers sing. It's kind of otherworldly in that way,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
it's almost a musical at times.
Yes,
Uh,
which I can't say I expected going into this. Like, we have the Broadway Melody here, we have Hollywood Review, and then, like, this also has an element of music to it, which is like, all right, I guess that's what Hollywood was really into at the time, and especially the Academy. I think the film itself does a pretty solid job of having us be on the Cisco Kid side, just because he's able to outsmart the people around him, which is something that can maybe come across as almost mean spirited and like he's taking advantage of people, but like the people themselves are just so lacking in common sense
yes.
and just like basic observational skills and human decency that it's kind of satisfying to watch him just sort of manipulate people around him. And as you were saying before, we get a scene early on where he's robbing the stagecoach and he ends up taking the box full of gold. He doesn't rob any of the individual passengers, and the one thing that he does take from one of them he actually pays for with gold, and she's so grateful to him. And one of them takes note of that. That's just like, yeah, that was kind of scary, but also like he didn't really rob us necessarily, so like maybe he's kind of a good guy. I don't know. And it shows that he had something of a moral code, even if he has this reputation. Whereas I think if they hadn't established that in the beginning, we maybe wouldn't be as willing to root for him if he just went ahead and robbed a bunch of innocent people. So
No. Yeah,
I give the story credit for that.
yeah, and it really does explain as the film develops in the town scenes how the townspeople kind of think, it's a Cisco kid. There's there's no fear of him. There's no judgment of him. He's just yeah, what a character.
Yeah, what a colorful character. Yes. Well, there's also Edmund Lowe as the sergeant. What do we think of him and what he's giving to the film?
What the hell was he doing? I mean, to his credit, he doesn't play it like a Dudley Do-Right kind of sergeant, but he's a Bowery boy in this, and he keeps singing about the Bowery all the time, and I'm wondering why. And it just he has these goofy lines, and he just seems more of a comical figure than anything else. So that when the plot machinations come later, it's kind of tough to buy this guy, really kind of in it with Tonya Maria to bilk the Cisco Kid. It's a very odd performance, but in a rather odd movie.
Yeah. He just, I don't know, he just seemed like very undirected to me. Like he was just given free rein to just do whatever he wanted with the character. I mean, I think he's fine. It's not like actively bad, but he does have a lot of the film's more comedic moments just because he's quite incompetent, I think, at this job. And he doesn't even really seem to want it in the first place. And he's just surprisingly trusting of people around him, which honestly makes him not really cut out for this job that he's been tasked with, especially in the barber shop scene where the Cisco Kid is right there in plain sight, kind of giving off the impression that like, I'm sort of nervous that I might be found out, and yet everyone, including him, are just totally oblivious.
Yeah.
Just totally snowed by him, and he's like pretending to be someone else, but he doesn't even seem like he's that convincing as that someone else. So I mean, what do we think of that scene overall?
Well, first of all, it's ridiculously long. It's like 9 or 10 minutes for
That's
just
what I was going to say. Yeah.
bit of information. And
Yeah.
let's just say that Irving Cummings' direction here is not very tight. There are long chit-chat scenes, the barber shop, at Tonya Maria's house. I mean, they're not talking about much of anything. So, I mean, every one of those scenes could be cut in half. Unfortunately, that would make this a 60-minute movie.
Right.
It's just not a whole lot here. It's enjoyable in its own way, and which I can't say for some of the other films we'll be talking about. But there's not a whole lot to it.
Yeah. Well, I think a part of that is that they were struggling still to figure out how to utilize sound, and so they had to rely on indoor scenes for like a third of the film is just indoor scenes, and they had to take out all the any desire to do like chase scenes that are so classic in westerns were just nixed.
Yes.
And so we had to just elongate these indoor scenes to the point that we could get into 90 minutes, and this is what happens.
And,
yeah.
and there's a show-offy, there are a few show-offy moments in the sound. There's a kind of a 10 to 15 second close-up of bacon and eggs sizzling in a pan.
Yeah, that's true.
For no other reason as to like, wow, listen to that sound.
Sounds so real. Yes.
Yes. Ooh, I could practically taste it. There are odd moments like that seem to be designed just to say, look what we're doing here.
Yeah, look what I can do. Sometimes it's hard for me to put myself in the mind of someone, a moviegoer in 1929, watching this movie and just sort of discovering the possibilities of sound on screen, and maybe in that context something like that would truly be impressive and not something that we're just sort of joking about, so
Yeah, in the 70s, people flocked to see sense around movies. They were terrible, but they wanted to hear the sound and be enveloped and have their chest pound with that sort of thing. And I can't help but to think that probably a lot of the appeal of a film like this was the sound. Is, oh my goodness, let's see what this is all about.
right, especially in a genre that would definitely benefit from the utilization of sound. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a lot of long scenes that draw out. I do want to credit the cinematography, even though there are quite a few like static shots that don't do a lot of movement because you don't want to mess things up with sound.
Right.
The film, I believe, has been digitally restored, so I think you're able to appreciate some of the landscape shots and some of the overheads that we get occasionally.
And it was shot in Bryce Canyon and Zion National Park. And I mean, it's always beautiful to see those national parks. They're really great. One thing I did want to mention is that it's one of the pre-Hays Code films. And there are a few double entendres in this.
I noticed.
Talking about how fast the Cisco Kid can be in romantic terms. And, the cook saying, well, how do you like your eggs? As he's, making out with Tanya Maria. Do you like it turned over? Things like
Yes.
that. Like, oh my God, So they're really kind of nudge, wink, wink moments in it that kind of take you out of the movie a little bit.
Yeah. There was another point where I think it was the sergeant, but he's next to a donkey and he just says jackass.
Yes.
And that was another kind of winky thing.
Yes. And before we leave it, I just want to have a side note that this was supposed to star and be directed by the great Raoul Walsh.
Yes, let's talk about this.
Yes, because it's kind of an interesting sidebar story to it. He was set to star, and he was going to be the Cisco Kid, and he was going to direct it. But he couldn't because he was driving along, and apparently a jackrabbit jumped through his windshield, which cost him an eye. And if you know Raoul Walsh, he's really most famous for his eye patch. And this is the film that necessitated him getting an eye patch. And I always wondered, and of all things, a jackrabbit cost it.
Yeah.
So as a result, he is credited with co-directing this, although in practical terms he didn't.
Yeah, it's a wild story. It seems like something like one of those stories that gets passed down that's not really true, but like, yeah, apparently a jackrabbit jumped through the windshield of his car and just got his eye. Like that's horrific. I can't even imagine going through that. And also I was reading that Buddy Roosevelt was then cast as the kid, but he broke his leg before he was able to film anything for the movie. Like, what's going on? This is like a cursed production. It's like The Exorcist.
Yes. And then they wound up getting Warner Baxter, who won the Oscar for it. So it all turned out well.
I guess so. Yeah.
Except
not for those guys.
Yes.
Who were maimed, but
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do want to mention a little bit about the ending here. You can duck out if you want to watch to the end of the film and come back, and here we go. But I found the ending to be pretty satisfying overall, even if it was very rushed. Like, I think all the action really goes down in the last 2 minutes or so, and then it's over. So yeah, if you want to watch the film before we delve into the few spoilers we have here, feel free to do so. But so basically, Tanya has this plan to set up the Cisco Kid by sending the sergeant a secret letter and telling him to come to her house at a certain time to take him down. And Tanya's sending the note through her cook, and then the Cisco kid kind of intercepts it and reads the letter and realizes what the plan is, and then writes his own letter and sort of does some forgery to sort of make his own plan, pretending it's from Tanya. And then the letter says that the Cisco kid will be disguised in her clothes and that she'll be in his clothes. So then the sergeant will come and basically shoot Tanya instead of him. And so the sergeant gets the letter and, again, doesn't even really question that it might be a fake. So just extremely trusting. And goes over to the house, and what the plan is ends up what is actually happening, and he's riding off into the sunset. I sort of enjoyed this as a climax just because I was glad to see those two very dumb and annoying characters just be outwitted by the Cisco kid. I just found it to be pleasurable. What did you make of the ending?
I liked it too. I mean, it's kind of unexpected for a film of that time period to have a major twist ending. But if you see the credits, you see it's based on O. Henry's story, and he's most known for his twists. It involves presumed cross-dressing in this, and it's very it's like, okay, this is kind of elaborate, let's see if it works, and it does. And you wind up as the Cisco kid rides off, you feel very satisfied, and came away, it's like, oh, okay, that was a little different, I'll buy it.
Yeah, I can imagine an audience in 1929 being like, yeah, that was kind of different and unique for the type of film that it is. So
yeah, and it makes it different enough that it's very plausible that it was the runner-up.
Right, exactly. That's pretty much all I have on In Old Arizona. There's not a lot to get into thematically or just much beyond that in this very long middle section. But I did just want to note that this is kind of part of a big franchise for Warner Baxter, playing this role another 4 times. And eventually it was actually cast with Latino actors in a lot of the other films, like Cesar Romero, Gilbert Rowland, Duncan Ronaldo, and then most recently was Jimmy Smits in 1994. So this is a character that has sustained centuries at this point, or just 1 century. I don't know if there's been anything in the 21st century, but still kind of noteworthy. I can see why that could happen because it's a very charismatic character.
Yeah.
And one other note I just wanted to make: why is it called In Old Arizona? It's just a very generic title that, like, I don't get anything from that imagery. Like, why not just call it Cisco Kid, right?
Yeah, that's basically it. It really it sounds like a travelogue.
Yeah,
with that title.
I know. So, anyway, that is In Old Arizona. It is one of these films from the early years that is actually available on official streaming services, which is a godsend, basically, because there's another film we're gonna get to in this discussion that is not available at all and is lost to time, unfortunately. So if you want to check it out, feel free. There you have it. Any other thoughts on In Old Arizona?
No, it's as many problems as it has. Those problems pale with what's coming up.
Wow, what a beautiful tease for what's to come. All right. Well, when we come back, we will be delving into the second Academy Awards and discussing how In Old Arizona lost Best Picture to the Broadway Melody. Have you ever wanted to share a bit of the spotlight with Meryl Streep? Or play a game where Daniel Kaluuya is on your team? Sounds interesting. Well, this year you can, thanks to today's sponsor, the Star Draft. As you guys already know, award season is finally almost here, and Star Draft lets you be a part of it like never before. It's kind of like fantasy football meets the Golden Globes. Here's how it works. Head to thestardraft.com to create a league to invite friends, or join a public league to make new ones. Draft a team of 10 actors and musicians. Think Olivia Colman is going to sweep every award show this winter? Well, that certainly wouldn't be triggering for me at all, but you can draft her. Before every nomination and award show, set a lineup. Every time your actor or musician earns an accolade, they earn your team points. Then sit back, relax, watch the awards, and rehearse your acceptance speech like Kate Winslet talking into her shampoo bottle. The site's top-scoring team at the end of Oscar night earns a cash prize. It's 100% free, and because I love the Star Draft and you all so much, I've created a public league that you can join right now. All you have to do is sign up and join the And the Runner-Up Is League at thestardraft.com. That's www.thestardraft.com. As always, I look forward to beating you all award season long. And we're back. So now we'll be discussing why In Old Arizona was the runner-up to the Broadway Melody, and In Old Arizona was nominated for 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Irving Cummings, Best Actor for Warner Baxter, Best Writing, and Best Cinematography. And it won Best Actor. And just as a general rule, when I talk about nominations, I know that it's not official nominations by Academy Records, that it is in fact, the sort of de facto nominees of what was discussed. So whenever I say nominations, that is what I mean. I understand the context of it. So let's talk about how In Old Arizona was the runner-up here, and why the Broadway Melody, which does not win any other Oscars, ends up just winning Best Picture. So yeah, what are your theories on why this one managed to win over all these other wonderful films?
It might be just as simple as the power of MGM.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard to underestimate just how powerful that studio was during this period. And in fact, they have another nominee coming up too. But this is, if you can call it substantive, at least there's a plot to this one. It became the first talkie to win Best Picture, and it's one of the first musicals, I think, that used Technicolor in its original release. It's, what's available to us now is, the Technicolor stuff is not there, but it also had recorded dialogue, and it was just it was another one that really showed off the sound. In the first scene in a music publishing company is a cacophony of sounds with people, various recording studios, and you all hear it at once, and it's another one of those, look what I can do, and they do it.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about these two films in juxtaposition with each other, just for the fact that they are both innovating with sound in their own specific ways, but that one is clearly the more spectacle-driven, splashy, and full of very apparent production design. And I do think that all of that, combined with the box office success of the Broadway Melody, which, by the way, it broke records at the time. So, very early to be breaking box office records, but it was the movie of this particular point in time from 1928 to 1929. And so, yeah, I think that was a huge part of it. The first all-talking musical that Hollywood produced. So advancing the medium, all of that, I think it's just one of those clear spectacle types of films. I don't think substance-wise it really has a lot, and even at the time, I imagine people felt that way too, which is where maybe there were others in the executive board of judges that were like, this is not really the most substantive film that we could reward here, maybe In Old Arizona is the better one in that regard, or The Patriot, or I don't know, Alibi. But yeah, I think it was the big movie of the year. That's really kind of like half of the reason why most of the Best Picture winners that I've talked about have won, at least leading up to the 21st century, is that they just made a big splash. A lot of people talked about it, and they came out to the theaters. It was a huge success. You win Best Picture. That's it.
It was an enormous diversion.
Yeah, yeah. At a time when we needed it as a country.
Exactly.
So, yeah. I mean, this is one of those Best Picture winners that has a reputation for being one of the worst. And that is understandable now, having watched it.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot for a modern audience to really appreciate or enjoy. I mean, the songs are decent enough, kind of in the moment, but mostly forgettable. I mean, I've already talked about Broadway Melody of 1936, so I sort of already knew what I was getting into here. Just a lot of spectacle, not a whole lot of concrete plot, although this had a bit more than I was expecting, which is the story of these two sisters who really aren't that talented, to be honest. Trying to make it in New York as a vaudeville act. There's just a very tedious romance angle to it, where it's like a producer is engaged to one sister, but then he falls in love with the other sister, and that doesn't seem to be really examined at all, that he is just kind of doing that, but that's fine. And there's tension between the sisters. It's a lot of yelling, a lot of shrieking, and it all doesn't really leave much of an impression. And I'll just say thank God that musicals were able to improve beyond this, with performers who were actually good at singing and dancing, and the cinematography could be more creative rather than just using these static shots all the time, and that there can be actual joy in a musical rather than this melodrama that doesn't hold up at all. So yeah, not one of my favorites. Tom, we mentioned earlier that I seem to be having you on for these Best Picture winners that do not hold up. And I apologize for that.
When last I was on, the Best Picture winner of the year we were talking about was The Greatest Show on Earth. And it's like, oh my gosh. Oh, it's like, here's a dog Best Picture winner. Let's get Tom on. But hey, that's, it's fun. This has a really terrible reputation, and now I can see why. The pacing is all off. The song Broadway Melody, which I really only knew from the last sequence of Singing in the Rain, which Gene Kelly does it, in a Gene Kelly way, and it's like, oh, that's a good song. Well, this was where it was introduced, and it gets performed in its entirety twice in the first 15 minutes by Charles King. Then at the half-hour mark, it gets performed again, and then it gets instrumentally performed at about the hour mark. So, I mean, you're going to come away remembering that song. There is the one song that was memorable. You Were Meant for Me, in my terrible voice. But, that has gone on to become a standard. So there are things about this that have lived on. It's just that the movie really hasn't. The sister act is really strange because one sister is very talented, played by Bessie Love, and the other sister, the beautiful one, who Bessie Love's character Hank is protecting, and played by Anita Page. Anita Page is not very good in this at all, and she has really very little musical movement to her that seems natural. And as a sister act, they just don't make it, but they are supposedly a sensation in the Midwest, and Eddie had to bring them to New York, where they would just dazzle audiences, and it's like, they're not so hot.
Yeah. I watched it, and then I forgot about it like 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that just doesn't register. I mean, I don't think it's the worst Best Picture winner, but I just can't imagine there weren't other films from this year that would hold up better. And it's hard to know within the context of 1929 that, like, this is not a movie that's going to be replicated as much and be as effective as it is now than, later on. But yeah, doesn't
It's
work.
it's
Yeah.
way up. It's I know that there are some folks who are more familiar with recent dogs like Green Book and Crash. But if you really want to see some bad Best Picture winners, come back to the 30s.
Yeah.
We've got
Cimarron.
Cimarron. Oh Lord. Um, and but this year in particular is really a bad year. In fact, there's an article in Rotten Tomatoes in which they list the worst reviewed uh, Best Picture nominees over the years. So we're talking about hundreds of films. And out of the 10 worst reviewed ones, three of them are in this lineup.
Love that. Yes. um,
And
I
Broadway
don't.
Melody is very prominent.
Hmm. I don't know what it is about this year. They just did not. They did not have it. I mean, I look at the very next year where we talked about The Big House and All Quiet on the Western Front, and even The Divorcee was pretty good. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. There's just something weird about this year that something didn't come together. um,
It, it's almost as if they were so concerned with getting the technical sound stuff out there
yeah, I
that
think that's true.
story and characters seem to get lost by the wayside.
Yeah,
And
it's just a lot of spectacle and use of sound, and yeah, you're probably right. Yeah.
and even with this film that prides itself on its sound, uh, they also kind of fall back onto titles into separate scenes. It's like, ooh, the girl's apartment, and
Yes.
ooh, the show, that kind of thing. And so it's again another one that has a little bit of silent elements to it and some sound elements to it.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know if you even really need those title cards, to be honest. I feel like people can figure it out that,
Yeah,
like, now
yeah.
now we're in an apartment. We don't need a title card saying the sister's apartment. So yeah, it's just the Hollywood was in flux and they didn't know what to do. So I give them a little bit of leeway, but still, it's hard to recommend most of this lineup to a
Yeah.
modern audience. Let's get to some questions here. We got quite a few. So this is from Mark Lamb about the Broadway Melody. Did Bessie Love deserve her nomination?
I I think she's the best thing in it.
I agree. Yes, playing
Yeah.
Hank, as you said. Yeah, I think she has the most depth and she's given the most to do, and so that obviously helps. I can't really think of anyone else around her that is up to her level, and I can't say I've seen a lot of the films of this particular year, so sort of by default I have her in, but I could be convinced otherwise once I maybe see more. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, she has her character of Hank has a lot of dimension to it. She is extremely talented. She's the brains of the operation, and she is the uh, character who gets cheated on,
Yeah.
which is always usually a great role. And she really makes the most of it. I've got to say, if there's an element to this besides a few of the classic songs that hold up, I think it's her performance.
Yeah, I would agree. This is from Fritz and the Oscars. Why is the sister act in Broadway Melody so horrible, and why do they think they can become stars with it?
I don't think it was intentional.
I don't know. I think maybe there's an element of like them being underdogs and like maybe they're not the best of the best once we first see them, but like eventually they'll get there, but that doesn't even really happen. So I don't know. Maybe you're right that it wasn't even intentional.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe they were trying to make Anita Page a star.
Hmm.
this wasn't the best showcase for her,
No.
but unfortunately. So you never know, in terms of studio politics back then, why certain people are cast in certain roles.
Yeah.
But Bessie Love really carries that sister act completely.
Yep. Mark Lamb said, "Do we love the gay humor in the Broadway Melody, such as the Fay Couturier and the large wardrobe woman?"
Oh God. well, well, back then it was probably thought of as somehow daring. There's kind of that history of the Fae
Yeah.
supporting character, the Everett Horton kind of character,
Hmm.
and it's kind of unfortunate. I think there's a lavender joke in it, and it's
Yep.
like, ooh, dear, dear, dear. So,
Hmm.
but it was a staple, in a lot of the romantic comedies, having gay or fey characters be in support and be the quote unquote comic relief.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly dated, but and on some level I just sort of appreciate them being there at all. It's
Yeah.
not like they've been erased from history. Like there are gay people on Broadway. That's what happens.
It's
um Shocker. Yes. Um this is from Matthew Lucas. Do you think the Broadway Melody is the worst Best Picture winner?
oof, oof. For me, it's top five. Cimarron's bad. Greatest Show on Earth is bad. Uh, yeah, I think it's way up there. What do you think, Kevin?
I don't have it as my worst, and I do have Cimarron as my worst. So that is, yeah, I mean, that's just that. But it is probably in my bottom seven, I want to say, just eyeballing it now. I sort of give it a little more leeway considering the time period and how they were just figuring things out versus movies that are later on that should have their act together but are still bad. So,
Yes.
you know, Ronaldo Sosa said, rank the three big spectacle with no plot Best Picture winners: The Broadway Melody, The Great Ziegfeld, and The Greatest Show on Earth.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Hmm.
The Great Ziegfeld has spectacle. Like I'll hand it that.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's kind of, even, they'll have the dancing guys in top hat and tails, dancing on the huge wedding cake. But after seeing The French Mistake and Blazing Saddles, it's kind of hard to take the Great Ziegfeld one seriously.
Fair
Uh,
enough.
but it's 3 hours. Jeez Louise.
Yeah.
That is tough to take. Greatest Show on Earth has some decent performances in it. As empty as it is, I gotta say, I think this may be the worst of the three.
Hmm. I think I would honestly rank The Great Ziegfeld as the best of them, and that's
Yeah,
just being very
probably.
generous. Just in the sense that I have the least problems with it, I guess.
Yeah,
I think Louise Reiner is pretty decent in her role, and yeah, I think it's a semi-interesting story, at least. I don't know. Broadway Melody, I would say, is in the middle for me, and then The Greatest Show on Earth, I just can't even imagine myself rewatching again.
yeah.
So that
There, there,
automatically is at the bottom.
there are moments in that are wincingly bad.
Yep,
In a year that had good films
exactly. Well, this leads us to an interesting question as well, which is from Best Picture Cast. Some of the more maligned modern Best Picture winners often get placed at the very bottom of people's Best Picture rankings. Can any winner after 1970 realistically be ranked lower than the Broadway Melody?
that's
This
easy.
is
No.
this is kind of tying back into what you were saying earlier, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think a number of, like Crash. Crash is a terrible film, but I think we particularly dislike it because it beat Brokeback Mountain,
Yeah. I
and
mean, I still hate it because it's a bad film, but
it's a
go
bad
ahead.
film. It still is a bad film.
Yeah.
And there are moments in Green Book that are wincingly bad too. But boy, you put those two up against Broadway Melody and The Greatest Show on Earth, and there's no question that the earlier ones were far worse.
Mm.
What are your thoughts, Kevin?
Yeah, well, the only modern, like after 1970 Best Picture winner I would consider for the very bottom is Crash. And that's, again, not just me being like, oh no, it beat Brokeback Mountain. Now I hate the movie. It's just, I genuinely think that that is a awful, awful movie. And so that is why I would have it there. But I sort of agree in general that, like, at least it's competently put together. And you can't really
Yeah.
say that compared to some of the earlier ones. Yeah, I struggle with that, but I think that would be the only one post 1970 that I would even have in the discussion of like super bad.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
not even Green Book, I don't think is worthy of the vitriol that it gets. So,
Oh, fair enough.
yeah. All right, well, let us move on to these other Best Picture nominees, shall we?
Oh, the dog parade continues.
Yes, the dog parade, indeed. Let's talk Alibi. So this has Chester Morris, which we just talked about him with the Big House.
Mhm.
And I mentioned on that episode that he was already in the club with the Oscars, and this is what I was talking about. This is where he gets nominated, and he's playing another criminal who is in a gang, and he's released from prison, and he commits a robbery, and that ends up resulting in the death of a cop. But then he's able to use kind of an alibi, the titular alibi, of him being on a date with a woman at the theater, and he committed the crime during intermission. And so the rest of the film is just about, you know, the police trying to prove that he did it. This is another super early sound film, so it's far from perfect. But at the very least, I think Roland West, the director, gets to be more creative with camera angles because it's mostly indoors. So it's more of a dynamic film than, I guess, all these other films, to be honest. But at the same time, I can't say I would really recommend this one either because it's very brutally paced
Yes.
and the acting is kind of stiff. I think Chester Morris is fine. He sort of carries it well enough, but certainly not as dynamic as his performance in The Big House.
Yeah.
It's a genre I certainly like, but can't say I would recommend it. What about you, Tom?
No, I really can't recommend it either. There are some interesting things they're playing with here. There's a lot of shadow, kind of kind of German expressionistic, and there's some playing around with sound. It's but it kind of it's another one with one foot in each camp. There's the camera movements are uh, very reminiscent of silent cinema. But then you'll get to a dialogue scene and they just plunk the camera down and not move it at all. So it's a little bit of this and that. Chester Morris is pretty good in it. He does kind of keep you going. And Regis Toomey has another endless death scene in it. So he's really good at dying. Uh, but by and large, it's kind of forgettable. And that's also in the top 10 of worst reviewed Best Picture nominees, according to Rotten Tomatoes. And I don't think it's that bad, but it's not great. So
I will say the ending is a little bit unintentionally funny for me.
yeah,
Just in the way it's constructed and what happens to a certain character is very over the top and fake looking in a way that it really took me out. So
yeah.
I think you know what I'm talking about. So
Right.
yeah. We got this question from Catherine Short, who said, "What's up with Chester Morris's flamboyant makeup in Alibi?"
Well, I think there may have been a makeup artist in there who wanted to show his or her stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a little striking the first time you see him. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, when I first saw this question, I was like, I don't really remember noticeable makeup there, but when I was looking back, because it's fully available for free on YouTube, just
yeah.
for people out there, it's quite white. Like it's like almost a vibrant white,
Yeah.
and just very like arched eyebrows, and yeah, I can sort of see what they're talking about there, but I don't know. I mean, it's just we're experimenting. We're still working with visuals and sound. So again, I sort of excuse things like that. That is pretty much all I got on Alibi.
Yeah.
So let's move on to Hollywood Review, otherwise known as the Hollywood Review of 1929. Okay, this is going to be fun. So this is definitely one of the most unique Best Picture nominees that I've ever encountered. Basically, this is the modern equivalent of a variety special, and it was nominated for Best Picture. This is MGM showing off all their big stars and just letting them do their thing. Whether it's singing or dancing, comedy skits, just all the classic tropes of variety specials are here.
Yeah.
I don't even really know how to rate this as a film, but it's very hit or miss overall, and I think probably a real case of like you had to be there. You know, like sometimes if you watch an old SNL episode and they make references to specific things and you're like, I don't know what they're talking about. That's kind of like what this feels like for me.
Yeah. I mean, really, the only thing missing is Ed Sullivan.
Truly, yes. But it's truly a murderer's row of cast members here. We have Joan Crawford, Marion Davies, Jack Benny, Norma Shearer, Bessie Love, and Anita Page are here. Marie Dressler, who I love, John Gilbert, Conrad Nagel, Buster Keaton, Laurel and Hardy, Lionel Barrymore, just totally star-studded. I know you said you weren't able to watch this, and I will say that is perfectly okay. You could just probably watch some clips on YouTube and get the general idea.
Yeah. They have a particularly actually a decent clip on YouTube of Buster Keaton in this, which he does some really remarkable gymnastic elements. His body is just so fluid, and what he is able to do with it in a costume scene, which is really really terrific. And if you wanted to see Joan Crawford sing and dance, here you go.
Yeah. Um I love her, but I don't know if I really enjoyed her performance here, to be honest. Just saying, didn't really work for me, but a lot
Yeah.
of a lot of weird comedy sequences also. I don't know why there's multiple sequences where people are shrunk down to like miniature size for little comedy bits, but that's fine. Um
Because they
there's a
can, I guess. Yeah.
because they can and they want to show off.
Yeah.
Norma Shearer and John Gilbert are doing like a Romeo and Juliet segment where they're speaking with like a modern sensibility, like a modern parlance. That's kind of funny. There's like a technicolor element to that that's very early and innovative. And Singing in the Rain shows up as a song here.
It's the first time it's been. I think this is the debut of it.
It is, yeah.
Which is kind of funny that it ties into Singing in the Rain. Then it reminds me of Broadway Melody because that song is in that film, and it's the world of the Arthur Freed unit at MGM.
Truly. I mean, also there's a moment when Bessie Love and Anita Page come out and they literally reference the Broadway Melody. And like, I don't know, I'm trying to remember if there's any other like Best Picture lineups where a they mention in the film another film that is also nominated for Best Picture that year, because that's just, it's so meta.
It's that canny self promotion that MGM does so well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Marie Dressler, like I said, comes out at one point and nearly steals the show. I love her. Yeah, Marion Davies is cute and fun. I mean, it's fine for what it is. It's not too offensive, which is a plus, quite frankly. But otherwise, more the kind of thing you would want to watch in clips rather than the whole 2 hours of this. It's just a lot. Yeah.
The only thing I associate with this film, having heard about it, said, "Oh, that's the one where John Gilbert speaks," and it is thought by many that this film ruined his career because the voice didn't go with the image. And he did a couple of other films after that, but this one really hurt him. You know, it's a shame because he was a pretty good silent actor, but it did not show him off in his best ways, and unfortunately, it's just him being himself.
Yeah, that is pretty brutal.
Yeah.
And we got a question kind of sort of related to that, which is from Mark Lamb. How did Greta Garbo get out of appearing in this? My guess is they were not ready to expose her voice yet.
Mark, that's a pretty good explanation, I think.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally believe it. And
Yeah.
because they certainly made the most of it when they did want to reveal it to audiences.
And from what I was reading, they filmed this basically after, like, basically on the night shift when stars would get off from filming their regular movies during the day. They would just go onto this stage and film this on their off hours, basically. And I'm just imagining that, like, Greta Garbo would just be like, I'm not interested in that. I'm not doing that. So yeah, that's probably part of it too. Let's move on to our last film, which is The Patriot. This is unfortunately the only Best Picture nominee that is lost to time. Apparently UCLA has like a quarter of the footage of the film, but there is not any known complete copy of the film, which is very unfortunate because it sounds quite interesting, I have to say, from reading about it. It's an Ernst Lubitsch film, and I'll just read the IMDb synopsis like I've done with other films that I was not able to access. In 18th century Russia, the Tsar, Paul, is surrounded by murderous plots and trusts only Count Palin. Palin wishes to protect his friend, the Mad King, but because of the horror of the king's acts, he feels that he must remove him from the throne.
Well, certainly it appears to be a film of much greater substance than Hollywood Review of 1929.
Yes.
Yeah, and it has Emil Jannings in it, and my God, it's a Lubitsch film. There is a trailer on YouTube, so you can see a little bit of what it once was and how they sold it. It is a bit of a spectacle. Jannings gives it what seems to be an obviously very big performance in it, but it's so hard to gauge whether the whole thing came together just based on a trailer. And I don't think that UCLA has ever released the footage that they have.
No.
But there doesn't seem to be much reason to do it, I suppose.
Yeah, it's very sad to me. We've talked about this before with other films of this nature. Also, Disraeli is very hard to find. I mean, these are films that were nominated for Best Picture, and they're very difficult to find or completely unavailable. And we talked about this last time with Karen, that I really wish that the Academy would work more to preserve their films that they've nominated in the past. and sort of make that one of their goals, the preservation of film history. But we talked about that last time, so I won't get into it again. It wins the Writing Award, and it's nominated for Best Picture and Director. And as far as I'm concerned, this could have plausibly been the runner-up since it gets 5 nominations, but it's not available, so I can't really talk about it.
No.
Yeah, it's a shame because this is a pretty awful Best Picture lineup, and by all accounts, this could have been like the one that is like the savior of the group, but it's just lost time.
Yeah, it's a shame. Um, but I know that there's been a lot of speculation as to what has been the worst year for Best Picture nominees. I think
Yes.
this has to rank very, very high, if not the worst. There,
Yes. Well, we did get a question about that. I know
oh,
you're already peeking at the question, so
I'm just
um
segueing. That's all, Kevin.
okay. See, you're this is like a well-oiled machine at this point. This was from our pal Cody Derricks saying, "What's the worst Best Picture lineup? 1963, 1930 to 1931, or this one?" And he says, "My vote is this one. Nothing redeeming here."
I think Cody's right. Man. 63 wasn't great. That might be, I think, probably the worst lineup post 1960.
Yeah,
Um,
that's for
that's
sure.
and
Yeah.
but this one is it's just a parade of dogs. So it's
I
an
think
island
this is
dog.
yeah. It's truly an Isle of Dogs, and I feel trapped on this island watching these movies. Yeah, I mean, we just got done talking about the 1930 to 1931 lineup a few episodes ago, which had Cimarron, East Lynne, The Front Page, Skippy, and Traderhorn. Most of those are pretty bad, but at least it has The Front Page, which I love. Not love that version, but I love as a property.
Yeah.
And this one, though, I can't say that I love any of them or even necessarily like any of them enough to recommend them to people. So this is officially the worst Best Picture lineup in history.
Dun, dun, dun.
Put the stamp on it right there.
There we go. Boom.
All right. Yes. Well, this is sort of what we've been talking about anyway, but
Yeah.
Gabe Guarine said, "Is it possible that The Patriot could have been the best of the lineup were it not lost?" Yes, it's certainly possible. Or it could have been even worse than all of these, and we just don't know.
Yeah, it does have the heft that a Best Picture really needs, and from what is visible of it from the trailer, there does seem to be a big silent kind of acting style to it, which I'm not quite sure would work as well over the course of several hours. But nonetheless, it compared to these other films, it does seem much more substantial. And Lubitsch behind the camera, you gotta really anticipate a good film.
So, John T. says The Patriot is the only Best Picture nominee that is truly lost, but certain other major Oscar nominees are nearly impossible to find. It's not so much a question, but I think it'd be cool to hear everyone's ideas on how we ensure Oscar fans continue to have access to nominated films. Tom, I don't know if you have any grand ideas that can solve this mystery of finding and preserving Best Picture nominees and other lost films, but do you have any
It's
opinion on this one way or the other?
it's almost two questions there. I think preservation is one issue, and thanks to people like Martin Scorsese, who's working very, very hard to make sure that the great films are preserved, and even not so great films. Uh, but distribution and accessibility is another entire issue. And where can you see it? I mean, they're especially some of the older films. They're not, would say, not terribly commercial for a streaming service to pick up. which is the new reality. So I don't know unless there's a place like the Criterion Channel who will make an effort or a program to make sure that every Best Picture nominee, for example, can get seen at some point, a Best Picture festival of sorts. But unfortunately, I think the commercial realities are that not too many outlets might be attracted to something like that, which is a shame.
Yeah, that is indeed the sad reality is yes, Criterion could certainly be in business there, but TCM is certainly another one. I wish that the Academy, like I said, would be more actively involved with this. It really doesn't seem like they are, even though they have a lot of resources and they have the Academy Museum that they're propping up right now. Maybe now, like we were saying on last week's episode, that maybe now that we're done with this, we can think about more preservation and restoration and getting some of these movies distributed. Yeah, I mean, if in an ideal world there would just be like a Oscar streaming service by the Academy for any nominated film. Obviously there's so many different distributors that it would probably be a huge investment, but still it'd be nice for people like me and you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, well, that is that lineup. So let us move on to our Should Have Been a Contender segment. So this is other films that were not nominated for Best Picture that we think deserve some special mention here. Tom, do you have any in mind?
The first one that comes to mind for me is Victor Seastrom's The Wind, which stars Lillian Gish. And right now, it's really considered to be one of the great silent films of the era. And I was very curious about it, and went back to see why wasn't this nominated, especially with all of these kind of empty Best Picture nominees, and was very surprised to see that this classic of silent film was really panned when it came out, and is not surprising that it didn't get nominated given the very negative reviews. Thankfully, people began, as the generations came on and film aficionados began to see it, could see what's in it. And now it's considered, I would probably say, one of the best films of this period, of this year. But at the time, no. But I wish it had been, because it really would have given some real artistic integrity to this particular Best Picture race that desperately needed it.
Yes. I was not actually able to watch this, but from what I read about it, this is sort of like one of those, I guess it sounds crass to say like last gasp of silent film era, but just one of those that's like one of the last great ones to be made. And yet, as you said, it was very divisive, almost to the point of being panned. And ultimately that the Academy just doesn't go for films like this more often, especially in a year like this where they're really emphasizing sound films and like the future. It's this is what happens. But we did get this question from Matt Mazer saying, was The Wind or Lillian Gish ever viewed as a contender? I mean, hard to say that it was, considering reviews.
Yeah, it's a shame, and it seems like a huge mistake now. But it's when you go back to take a look at what the film really had in terms of reviews, it's understandable that the Academy wouldn't bite, and especially since the big emphasis was on sound, they may have been a little reluctant to honor a silent picture.
Exactly, which is something that we've also talked about with like, why was Modern Times by Charlie Chaplin not nominated? Well, because that was even more the case of looking to the future and not silent films, even though that's a masterpiece. So, speaking of that somewhat, I wanted to talk about The Cameraman. So this is a Buster Keaton film, probably the first time I'm talking about Buster Keaton. Unfortunately, I won't be talking about him much more after this, but it's a silent film and a comedy about a photographer who is hoping to just impress a woman that he likes by becoming a newsreel cameraman. I've said hijinks ensue many times to describe the plots of films on this show, but truly not a finer example of hijinks ensue than what happens in The Cameraman. Lots of fun, like little bits of him just struggling to operate the camera, and he gets caught up in a gang war in Chinatown. Eventually there's a monkey that sort of befriends him, and he's kind of his sidekick, and he tags along. And you know what? I pride myself in liking a lot of kind of difficult and contemplative movies, but sometimes you see a monkey trying to operate a camera and you're just like, this is why I love the movies, you know? Just a really well edited film, great comedic timing. And this was, speaking of last gasps, this was the last for Buster Keaton in terms of really having tight control of his films. And from here on out, he would have to sort of kowtow to the studios, and that he did not care for that. So highly recommend The Cameraman.
It's a wonderful example of the physicality of Buster Keaton.
Oh yeah.
He, Chaplin is in a way more cerebral, but Keaton's physicality, he uses action in a way to generate laughs in a way that few comic actors have been as skilled at Keaton. And he really, you can see this film is of a piece. You can tell there is a vision here,
exactly,
from beginning to end.
Yep.
And it is miles ahead of anything that we've talked about so far.
Yep. And notice that we've only been talking about silent films, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
But I would, if you've never seen The Cameraman, by all means, if you can find it somewhere, please take a look at it. You will not regret it. It is wonderful.
Yes. I also wanted to talk about The Divine Lady. This has the distinction of being one of only 2 films to win Best Director, while not even being nominated for Best Picture. And the other one was at the first Academy Awards, where somebody won for Best Directing for a comedy feature, which is a category that would just not even exist a year later. So this is like the only example of a proper Best Director winner that the film wasn't even in Best Picture. So this is kind of a hybrid sound and silent film where there's a lot of like sound effects and musical stuff and other elements, but no actual spoken dialogue. And it's about the relationship between Emma Hamilton and Horatio Nelson. And people might know Emma Hamilton from when Vivien Leigh played her in That Hamilton Woman. So this is about her. She was a real life person who was involved in the aristocracy, kind of a rags to riches kind of story, and then eventually she gets into a relationship with a British Navy man, which is Horatio Nelson, who is involved with trying to take down Napoleon. So it's a big sort of war and romance epic in a way. I think it's trying to tackle a lot of material, and not all of it lands or is even really allowed to breathe because there's just so much going on. But Corinne Griffith is quite striking and compelling as Emma Hamilton. She's nominated for Best Actress, and I can see why the film won Best Director, just because it's very ambitious in its scope. But, maybe it's not super worth writing home about, but much better than the other Best Picture nominees. So kind of a surprise that it didn't get into Best Picture, considering it's just checking off so many boxes. But yeah. This was from Andrew Carden. He said, thoughts on why The Divine Lady missed Best Picture consideration while winning Best Director and scoring another pair of noms. I don't know. Corruption in the Academy. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, right back then, I know we talk about checking boxes for Oscars now. I'm not quite sure they had the boxes back
then. I guess the boxes weren't quite formed yet. Yes.
It was released by First National Pictures, which was a decent sized studio, but it's not MGM.
Yeah, no MGM.
And and it not have had had the push that some of the ones that made it into Best Picture got. That's
probably right.
Because in Old Arizona's Fox and Alibi's Paramount, and it's back then the studios were far more key to really getting the Academy to play ball.
Yeah,
and so that might have been a part of the reason why this didn't get there. Yeah. But still, that direction broke through. So I'm not really quite sure whether you can just chalk it up to studio interference, studio push.
Yeah, well, to be honest, Frank Lloyd, the director, was a charter member of the Academy. He was one of the founding members. So, they knew him. He was in the club. So
let's give it to old Frank.
Old Frankie.
Easy.
Yeah. Yes. We got two questions along the same lines from Mark Lamb and Catherine Short about how this movie compares to That Hamilton Woman, the Vivien Leigh film, which I have not seen, so I can't even speak to it. Have you seen it, Tom?
I have, and it's kind of interesting. It was released in 1941, and the time that the film depicts with Lady Hamilton and Horatio Nelson, it's also a war story set in Napoleonic times, and it was a very pro-British film that kind of plays as a little bit of, if not propaganda, at least we're going to buck up the troops, and because they were at that point when the film was released. The United States was not in the war. So the British were they were the main opponents of the Nazis at the time, and they really did need a kind of a buck up. So it does have that other element to it that I've not seen The Divine Lady, but from what I've read about it, that element is not there.
Interesting. Well, whenever I see it, I will be able to expand upon those thoughts. All right. Well, speaking of corruption, I wanted to talk about Coquette, which is the Mary Pickford winning Best Actress for Coquette. So I do not recommend this movie in the slightest. So this isn't really should have been a contender so much as I can't find another place to talk about it. So here we go. So Mary Pickford is our Best Actress winner. This is a really great example of Hollywood at that inflection point between the silent era and the talkies, and they were still trying to figure out how to incorporate sound, and it really, really shows here. Very, very clunky. Also, the acting style is very unnatural. I mean, even Mary Pickford, she feels very lost and self-conscious at certain points. Basically, she's playing a woman in the South who is wanting to be with a man of a lower class, even though her father forbids it. And, one of those classic tales as old as time, I suppose. Unless you really like Mary Pickford or you're an Oscar completist looking to see all the Best Actress winners, this is not a film worth watching. And one of the main Oscar stories from this year, is the fact that Mary Pickford wins. And people really see that as a clear example and one of the earliest examples of the Academy having a certain bias and not being truly about merit and more about, connections and voting for people that we like.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah,
Kevin, she's America's sweetheart, you know.
that's true. She
Yeah.
was the original Julia Roberts.
But she was incredibly connected, and it's
Yes.
sort of the actress equivalent of let's give it to old Frank, you know, let's give it to
Let's give it to
Mary.
old Mary. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's unfortunate, and and unfortunately, I think had a pattern that shows up now and then.
But, she was another charter member of the Academy,
Yeah.
and her husband, Douglas Fairbanks, was the president of the Academy. And from what I understand, she invited the board members over to her big mansion
Yeah.
and just kind of entertained them, and really was truly the first example of actively campaigning to win an Oscar. So, she helped found a studio, and that she was one of the founding members of the Academy and the first big America's Sweetheart movie star that she made. She had a lot of firsts in Hollywood, but this is another one, the idea of an Oscar campaign,
Yeah, I mean, back then, the Academy was very, very clubby. I mean, it always has been, in recent years to a much lesser extent, but very early on, those Academy dinners at the Hollywood Roosevelt, I can imagine it feeling like one big club, and that's whose turn is it to get an award? Oh, it's Mary's turn. And then, unfortunately, it was not for the greatest film in the world.
Yeah, no. This is from Glenda Miss Jackson, if you nasty, who says, was Mary Pickford the first career achievement win for her Best Actress win? Yeah, her and Frank, as we said.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, truly one of those, like, it's your time, even though the Oscars have only been around for 2 years at this point. It's like, finally, we're giving it to Mary.
At long last.
Yes. But also, there's an element to it that is another thing that continues to this day, which is that she is doing something different here. She's using her voice. She cut off her signature hair to a bob length. And, the whole transformative aspect of it. It's like, oh, now we're going to take you seriously because look how dedicated you are to your craft.
Yeah. And that continues to this day.
Exactly. Do you have another film you wanted to talk about here?
I think there's not a whole lot to talk about in this particular year.
No kidding.
Yes. Boy, oh boy. It's a shame because it's bookended by the first Oscars have really some terrific films in it, and then the Oscars following. But this one just seems to be a transition year, and transitioning in a very rough way. And,
yes.
Unfortunately, it's produced a lot of forgettable films. But nonetheless, it's kind of curious to go back and take a look at them, just to see what they're trying and failing, but nonetheless trying to do. And it may be that whatever kinks were worked out in this particular year with these not so great films help to make the sound films that came after them better.
There you go. That's a good perspective.
That's a silver lining somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to mention one more movie here because I watched it and I wanted to talk about it. But this is a very interesting story here. So it's a movie called Our Dancing Daughters, which is the Joan Crawford film. And I am going to immediately date this podcast, which I try not to do too much, but I just have to mention it because it sort of soiled my enjoyment of the movie. So I watched this one on the day of the election certification here in America, where the big insurrection happened in the Capitol. So I was very distracted overall, and it was difficult to really bring my mind to this kind of cute, inconsequential silent drama from 1928 and really focus on the mostly tame problems that they're dealing with here in comparison to the world being on fire in the real world. So, yeah, if I seem a little more tepid and don't have a lot to say on the film, that's part of why. But this is a Joan Crawford film, and she is in pure leading lady star mode. She's playing a flapper. There's a love triangle where she's kind of competing with her friend over a guy. It's kind of silly and fun, and there's a wild melodramatic ending that involves someone falling down the stairs, and it's quite funny. But Joan Crawford is so in her element here, just as the total center of attention, and she's so glamorous, and you can see why men would just be dying to be with her. It's just a cute little film from this era where she's just fully in charge of her star persona. So I just wanted to mention that one.
It really made her a star. And it's interesting, it was directed by Harry Beaumont, who also directed Broadway Melody.
Right. So there you go. Having a great year.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking. Yeah, but truly a wild context to have watched that movie in, must say. All right, so let's get to these few questions here, and we're almost done. All right, so Gabe Guarine says, does 1929 top 1931 as the worst year ever for the Oscars? And is 1929 the worst year for cinema in general? Yeah, I mean, it's hard to paint a full picture when I've only seen a very small section of films from this year, but I do not care for what I've seen so far. And as far as the overall Oscars, yeah, it's not great. I mean, the Best Actress win is pretty bad. The Best Actor win is solid, but certainly not anywhere near the top of wins in that category, so probably the worst. Ian Blacklock said, is there any movie nominated during this ceremony that should have at least won 2 Oscars? Yeah, so at this ceremony, this is the only Oscars that there were no movies that won multiple Oscars. Everything won one, and that was it, or nothing.
Yeah, I mean, because it was done by, the winners were determined by committee, basically.
Right, probably, yeah.
It seemed apparent that they were going to spread the love.
Looking it over, I can't really say that, like, any of these movies deserved more recognition than they got, to be honest.
Yeah.
So no, the answer is no. There you go. And finally, we got this question from Jackson DeStefano to really wrap us all up here. What do you think of these newfangled talking pictures? Do you think they'll stick around, or are they just a fad?
Oh my gosh. Well, that is a nice way to go out, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, you know, you can never tell with these things. I think they might just be a fad. Who knows?
Those gimmicks, yes.
Yes. I can't wait for whatever happens to the next iteration of, like, the talkies to something else where we can really have that conversation again.
Yes.
So, yeah. All right. Well, that is the second Academy Awards. Real Murderers Row there. So when we come back, we will be delivering our verdict as to whether we think the Broadway Melody deserved Best Picture or if it should have been In Old Arizona.
Go on, Dave. That's it. The chorus in F sharp. There may be streets that have their sorrow, a smile today, a tear tomorrow. But there's a street that lives in glory. It always tells the same old story. Don't bring a frown to old Broadway. You've got a clown on Broadway. Your troubles there are out of style, but Broadway, your way, where to smile. A million lights, they flicker there. A million hearts beat quicker there. No skies are gray on the great white way. That's the Broadway melody. Don't bring on to old Broadway. You've got a crown on Broadway. Your troubles there are out of style, but Broadway, your way, where to smile. A million lights, they flicker there. A million hearts beat quicker there. No skies are gray on the great wide way. That's the Broadway melody. Hot dog.
And we're back. So now we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether we think the Broadway Melody deserved Best Picture or if it should have been In Old Arizona. Tom O'Brien, very curious to hear your thoughts here. What is your verdict?
Well, it's really very tough to find a worthwhile candidate here. But I think of the five, not having seen The Patriot, the most enjoyable was In Old Arizona, I got to say. It was, really Warner Baxter kind of made you feel something, at least, for a character, which was in relatively short supply in the other films. There are wincing moments in Old Arizona that I don't really want to relive again, particularly with the Spanish characters, but on the whole, it's just kind of a goofball experience, and in this wasteland of films, I'll take it.
Yeah, I think that's probably where I land as well. I say In Old Arizona deserved it over the Broadway Melody with a lot of reservations. I mean, these are two movies that I can't say I would rank above like 2.5 stars, and that's being generous. But I guess you're right that I think it's just the most easily enjoyable film of the bunch, and that goes a long way in this particular lineup that is full of movies that are just trying to find their way and use sound in a way that they just don't really know what they're doing. This, at least, wasn't as distracting in that regard, so I give it some credit for that.
Yeah.
So, there you go. Well, Tom, we have reached the end here, and I wanted to just thank you so much for coming on this episode and all of the episodes that you've done with me over the years. We've really I feel like we've covered every major part of Hollywood history at this point together, and it's been a very fun journey talking with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I've had a wonderful time talking with you. I hope we continue on in whatever the next chapter is. And congratulations to you, Kevin. This series has been really, really terrific. And I think as your audiences have grown, they really appreciate all the time and effort that you put into it, because it shows in quality. So congrats on that.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Okay, so where can people find more from you on the internet?
Oh, let's see. Where do we start?
Where to begin?
You can find my industry writings at goldderby.com. And I will also do podcasts and written articles at nextbestpicture.com. And you can find my straight reviews at exactchangetoday.com. So, come on by and take a look.
And also follow you on Twitter if people haven't already, Thomas E. O'Brien.
That's right. So you can find me there. Please join me. That'd be great.
Yes. And you can find me, as always, at Kevin_Jacobson. The show is at Oscar Runner Up. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to hear even more Oscar nonsense, including me and Tom and Amy Thomason breaking down certain categories of Oscar lore, then go ahead and go over to patreon.com/AandTheRunnerUpIs, and we have a lot of fun over there. So with that, thank you so much, Tom, and I will bid you all adieu.